The path to God is one of humility. We've been talking about conflict between Christians and how a lot of the time our external conflict with other people is the fruit of an inward conflict and unfulfilled desires in our hearts, particularly desires that are for respect of others, respect in the world, or popularity or status. And this leads us to care more about what the world thinks about us than about what God thinks about us. And we tend to turn our backs on God for the sake of getting the pleasures of the world. But we come here in verse 6 of James 4, and it says, Therefore it says, God opposes the proud, but gives grace to the humble. So there's this question here, are you in your conflict with other people and causing fighting between you and other Christians because you're trying to puff yourself up in pride? You're trying to show yourself to be more valuable or more significant or more praiseworthy than other people. And that sort of behavior, that sort of pride, it says that God opposes. That's some serious stuff. Do you want to have the creator of the universe opposing you? Now, I don't want that. I don't think any of us want that. Pride is something that God opposes. But it says that God gives grace to the humble. So there's opposition to the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. And this is talking about when we humble ourselves before God, we recognize that we need grace, and we recognize also that the person that's standing across from us that maybe we're in conflict with, they need grace too. This is where God shows grace, not to those who think that they're more important than everyone else, or not to the people who think they're more worthy than everyone else, but to those who recognize that they have nothing before God other than the work of Christ. So when we humble ourselves before God and we recognize that we need grace, and we recognize that the person across from us is just another person like us who also needs the grace of God, that shifts our perspective, and it changes how we think about those people. It goes on in verse 7, it says, Submit yourselves, therefore, to God. Now, submission is a hard thing. This is, again, a pride thing. A lot of the time we have pride in ourselves, and we would rather make the rules for our own lives. We would rather live how we want to live, make ourselves the authority of our lives. But this is saying to submit ourselves to God. We want to be in charge, but in humility, we ought to submit and surrender all of our lives to God. Christians who are surrendered and are humbly submitted to the Lord probably aren't going to find it as easy to be fighting and at war with one another. And then it says, resist the devil and he will flee from you. Now that's a great promise. Whenever we consider temptation and whenever we consider the struggles that we're going to go through in this life, and it says resist the devil and he's going to flee from you, what a great promise that we just have to push back against the devil. But in reality, if we look at it in context and what it's talking about, sometimes that's harder than it seems. Sometimes whenever we're supposed to resist the devil, we think that it's easier or that it feels better instead to jump in where the devil wants us to fight and to be at war. Sometimes it's easier to unload on someone and to let all of our vitriol and our hatred out than it is to actually go to someone in love and to submit ourselves to God. It's easier to not resist the devil and to make ourselves look better than to resist him and humble ourselves. But if we resist him, he'll flee from us. What a promise. We ought to take advantage of that. There's an even better promise here, though. It says, draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. We're talking about nearness with God. We're talking about being in the presence of God. Draw near to God. But drawing near to God requires this submission and this humility. This is a difficult thing for us. And sometimes the result of it doesn't look like worldly success. It goes on in this to talk about mourning and gloom and mourning and weeping and retching. This isn't all stuff that we're just going to look at and say, yay, what a life, this is great. But in the end, it is the way to exaltation. It says, humble yourselves before the Lord and he will exalt you. In the end, God can lift us up higher than we could ever lift ourselves. And in our humility to him and in our submission to him, it actually shows us the path to God and the path to glory. Not many Christians are going to be fighting and going to war with one another if they are living in humility and submitting themselves to one another with the ultimate glory that God provides in view.